Maria Lopez was a woman who carried herself with calm confidence. She had lived in the same neighborhood for almost 5 years with her husband Daniel. Their street was lined with tall trees, neat front yards, and carefully trimmed hedges. Most of the families there were friendly, greeting one another with warm smiles. But one neighbor, Karen, always seemed restless. She noticed everything, from who left their trash bin out too long to who parked on the wrong side of the road. She never missed a chance to file a complaint with the Homeowners Association, and she often called herself the eyes of the street. On that sunny afternoon, Maria had just pulled her car into the driveway after finishing a 12-hour shift. She worked as a detective, and her job demanded focus, patience, and bravery. Like always, she kept her service weapon on her belt until she was safely inside her home. She parked her car, stretched her stiff shoulders, and stepped out with her grocery bags. The warm light reflected off the badge clipped to her waist, but what caught Karen's eye was the holstered gun beside it. Karen had always been quick to judge. From her porch, she squinted and leaned forward. She whispered to herself, "Unbelievable. She is walking around the neighborhood with a gun on her hip." Her heartbeat picked up. To Karen, rules were meant to be followed strictly, and in her mind, anyone carrying a firearm in public was breaking those rules. She did not take a moment to consider who Maria might be or why she carried it. Instead, she reached for her phone with the same speed she used whenever she spotted a neighbor's lawn growing too tall. The call connected quickly. "Hello, I'd like to report a woman walking around with a gun," Karen said, her voice filled with urgency. She gave the dispatcher Maria's address, her description, and every detail she could provide. "She's right outside her house. She looks dangerous. Please hurry." The dispatcher kept calm, asking standard questions. "Is the person threatening anyone right now?" Karen hesitated but replied, "No, but she has a weapon. She could be a risk." After taking the details, the dispatcher assured her that officers were on the way. Karen ended the call, feeling proud of her quick action. She believed she had done her duty to protect the neighborhood. Sitting back on her chair, she kept her eyes fixed on Maria, who was now unlocking her front door and carrying her bags inside. Maria had no idea about the call. She was simply thinking about how tired she was and how she could not wait to have dinner with Daniel. The day had been long. She had interviewed witnesses, reviewed reports, and handled tense situations at work. Home was her safe place, where she could breathe and enjoy the quiet. She set the bags on the kitchen counter and sighed with relief. Outside, Karen remained on the porch, glancing down the street every few seconds, waiting for the police cars to arrive. She pictured herself later telling her friends that she had stopped a dangerous woman. She even imagined the officers thanking her for her vigilance. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation. Meanwhile, inside the house, Daniel called out, "Maria, you're home. How was the shift?" "Tough but good," Maria replied with a tired smile. She walked over and hugged him. "I just want to relax now. Maybe we can eat soon. I'm starving." Daniel nodded, unaware of the storm brewing outside their door. The neighborhood was quiet as usual, birds hopping from branch to branch and the sound of children playing faintly down the street. But in Karen's mind, tension was building. She tapped her foot impatiently, waiting for sirens. She was convinced she had uncovered a threat. To her, Maria's holster was proof enough. Minutes later, Karen finally heard the faint hum of engines. She straightened up, gripping the armrest of her chair. 2 patrol cars turned onto the street, moving at a steady pace but with purpose. Their presence immediately caught the attention of other neighbors. Curtains shifted, blinds tilted, and curious eyes peered out from behind windows. Maria, still inside, had no clue what was unfolding. She was setting plates on the dining table, humming softly to herself. Daniel poured water into glasses and smiled. For them, it was an ordinary evening. But for Karen, it was the moment she had been waiting for. She stood and waved toward the patrol cars as if guiding them. She pointed at Maria's driveway with wide eyes, her lips moving quickly as though rehearsing the story she would tell. The officers parked near the curb, stepping out with alert but controlled movements. They were trained to expect the unexpected. Their hands rested near their holsters and their eyes scanned the area carefully. Across the street, more neighbors had come out to their porches, whispering to one another. Children were called back inside. The quiet evening had shifted into a scene filled with curiosity and unease. Inside the house, Maria heard the sound of car doors shutting firmly. She paused, brows furrowing. Daniel noticed her stillness. "What's wrong?" he asked. Something feels off, Maria said softly. She walked to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. Her eyes fell on the two patrol officers walking up the path. Beyond them, she saw Karen standing with crossed arms and an eager expression. Maria's lips pressed into a firm line. She immediately understood what had happened. She had seen that look on Karen's face before, the kind of expression that came from someone convinced they were right even when they lacked the full story. Daniel stood beside her, confused. Why are the police here? Maria sighed. I think I know. She adjusted her jacket, making sure her badge was visible on her belt next to her holstered weapon. She was calm, though inside she felt a flicker of frustration. After such a long day, the last thing she wanted was to explain herself in her own neighborhood. The officers reached the walkway leading to the front door. Their eyes were steady, and their voices were firm but polite as one called out, "Ma'am, can we speak with you for a moment?" Maria opened the door, stepping outside slowly, her posture steady. She had been in situations far more tense than this, and she knew exactly how to handle it. She nodded respectfully and said, "Of course, officers." Across the street, Karen held her breath, waiting for what she believed would be a dramatic moment. She could already imagine retelling the scene later, making herself the center of the story. She whispered under her breath, "You're welcome, everyone. I kept us safe." But what was about to happen would surprise her more than anyone else. The two patrol cars stood near the curb, their polished surfaces shining under the warm evening sun. The quiet neighborhood, usually calm and filled with the sound of distant laughter or chirping birds, now seemed heavier. The low hum of engines faded as the officers stepped out. Their movements were precise, not rushed, but careful. The presence of police officers was enough to stir the air and turn every head on the street. Neighbors peeked from windows, some leaning forward behind their curtains. A few opened their doors and stood on porches, whispering in low voices. Children were quickly pulled inside by anxious parents who did not know what the matter was but wanted to avoid any trouble. Karen, standing tall on her porch, straightened her shoulders. In her mind, she believed this was her moment of glory. She imagined officers turning to thank her for her quick call, perhaps even saying that she had prevented danger before it could spread. Her lips curled into a small smile as she adjusted her cardigan and waved toward the officers with importance. The two officers, one tall with sharp eyes and the other slightly shorter but with a calm face, walked with steady steps. They scanned the surroundings, alert but not alarmed. They noticed Karen pointing toward the house across the street. Following her hand, their eyes landed on Maria's driveway. Inside the house, Maria had already sensed something was wrong. She had worked as a detective long enough to know when tension filled the air. She had seen patrol cars move with that same energy countless times before while arriving at crime scenes. This time, however, they were outside her own home. She closed the curtain gently and turned toward Daniel, who was still puzzled. "The police are here," she said quietly. Daniel's eyebrows pulled together. "Here? Why?" Maria inhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced toward the porch where Karen stood. "I think Karen made a call." Daniel blinked in disbelief. "Because of your gun?" Maria nodded. "Most likely. She must have seen me step out of the car." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration showing on his face. "But you're a detective. You're allowed to carry it." "Yes, I am," Maria replied calmly. "But she doesn't know or maybe doesn't care. What matters now is how I handle this." The sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. The officers had reached the path leading to their door. Their posture was professional, not aggressive, but their eyes stayed sharp, ready for anything. Maria adjusted her jacket so her badge was more visible. She walked to the door with quiet confidence. Daniel followed behind, though worry filled his eyes. When the knock came, it was firm but not harsh. Maria opened the door smoothly. The officers stood before her, their expressions serious yet controlled. "Good evening, ma'am," the taller officer said. "We received a report and need to speak with you." Maria nodded respectfully. "Of course, I understand." The shorter officer glanced at her waist. He noticed the holster immediately but also caught sight of the badge gleaming beside it. His eyes shifted for a brief moment, though he remained silent. Karen, watching from her porch, leaned forward eagerly, trying to catch every word. She crossed her arms as though bracing herself for confirmation of her suspicion. Maria stepped fully outside so the officers could see her clearly. With a calm hand, she lifted her jacket slightly, revealing both her badge and weapon in a clear, professional manner. "I'm Detective Maria Lopez," she said firmly. "Here's my identification." She handed over her ID, her tone steady, her eyes meeting theirs with quiet strength. The taller officer accepted the ID and studied it. His face softened as recognition spread. "Detective Lopez," he said with a respectful nod. "We've heard of you." The shorter officer stepped back slightly, his shoulders relaxing as the tension eased. He turned his head toward Karen, who stood frozen, her mouth slightly open. The crowd of neighbors who had been whispering fell into silence. They could see the scene unfolding more clearly now. The woman Karen had accused was not a reckless stranger with a weapon, but a detective who had dedicated her life to service. Daniel, standing near the door, felt pride swell in his chest as he watched his wife handle the moment with calm dignity. She had been in countless high-pressure situations, but this one was different. This time she was not standing in a police station or chasing leads in the field. She was standing in front of her own home, protecting not only her name but her peace. The taller officer returned her ID with respect. His voice carried sincerity as he said, "Thank you for clarifying, Detective. We appreciate your cooperation." Maria nodded. "Of course, officers. You were only doing your job, and I respect that." The shorter officer added, "We'll make a note that there's no issue here. Sorry for the disturbance." Across the street, Karen shifted uncomfortably. Her earlier pride melted away, replaced with a flush of embarrassment. She had expected recognition for her alertness, but instead she had called the police on someone who wore the same badge the officers themselves saluted. The silence of the neighbors was heavy. Many of them glanced at Karen with quiet judgment, shaking their heads slightly. They realized how quickly suspicion had turned into humiliation. Maria glanced at Karen, her eyes calm but firm. She didn't speak yet, choosing instead to let the silence stretch. Karen looked away, unable to hold her gaze. The taller officer turned slightly, his eyes narrowing toward Karen for a brief moment. "Ma'am," he said to her in a polite but pointed tone, "next time please make sure your concerns are based on more than assumptions." Karen stammered, "I was just trying to keep everyone safe. I thought—" The officer interrupted gently but firmly. "Your thought nearly caused unnecessary trouble. It's important to be cautious, but it's also important to observe carefully before you call." Karen's face turned red. She nodded quickly, unable to argue further. Maria remained composed. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone was enough to show that she stood in the right. The officers, satisfied that the matter was clear, stepped back. They stood straighter, offering her a salute out of respect. Maria returned the gesture with a small nod, her eyes steady and professional. The neighbors, who had been holding their breath, began to murmur quietly again, though this time their words carried admiration for Maria rather than suspicion. Some even smiled softly, realizing they were safer than ever with a detective living among them. Daniel placed a hand on Maria's shoulder, his voice low and warm. "You handled that perfectly." Maria gave him a small smile. "It's part of who I am. I just wish people would ask before they assume." The officers turned and walked back to their cars. Their steps were lighter now, free of tension. One gave Maria another respectful nod before getting inside the vehicle. Engines started, and soon the patrol cars rolled slowly down the street, their presence fading as quickly as it had arrived. Karen stood frozen on her porch. She wanted to slip back inside her house unseen, but it was too late. The neighbors had witnessed everything. She lowered her gaze, pretending to tidy her sweater, before turning around and stepping through her door without a word. The street grew calm again. Birds resumed their songs. The heavy air lightened, but the memory of what had happened lingered. For everyone who had watched, the evening had turned into a lesson about quick judgment and respect. Maria and Daniel stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind them. Maria took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, her shoulders finally relaxing. She had faced down criminals, solved cases, and dealt with chaos, but the weight of suspicion in her own neighborhood felt different. Daniel poured her a glass of water and said softly, "You deserve peace here, at least at home." Maria nodded. "I do, and maybe after tonight people will understand better." Outside, the neighbors continued to talk quietly among themselves. Some shook their heads at Karen's rashness. Others expressed admiration for Maria's calm authority. And deep down, Many felt a new sense of safety knowing that a detective lived on their street. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Slowly, the neighborhood returned to its normal rhythm, though the memory of police cars and salutes would not fade quickly. For Maria, the evening was only beginning. She had faced one kind of challenge, but she knew another conversation still awaited her. She could not let Karen's actions pass without a word. The next part of her evening would not be about silence, but about truth. The sun had nearly slipped below the horizon, painting the neighborhood in soft shades of gold and pink. The police cars were gone, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Birds chirped from tree branches, and the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze filled the air. But beneath it all lingered the memory of flashing lights and sharp voices. Maria stood by the window, arms folded across her chest, watching the street return to its usual calm. Her badge still hung at her side, the holstered weapon still in its place, but she looked less like a detective now and more like a woman deep in thought. Daniel stood nearby, leaning against the kitchen counter, his eyes fixed on her. "You handled it so well," Daniel said quietly. Maria gave a faint smile. "It's what I'm trained to do." Her smile faded as quickly as it appeared. "But this isn't about training, Daniel. This is our home. We're supposed to be at peace here." He walked closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Karen doesn't understand. She acts before she thinks. Everyone knows that about her." "That doesn't excuse it," Maria replied firmly. "Her call brought officers to my door. If I hadn't shown my badge, things could have gone very differently." She exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't just about me. It's about the way she treats people. Someone else could have been hurt because of her assumptions." Daniel nodded in agreement. "So what do you want to do?" Maria turned from the window. Her eyes carried a quiet determination. "I'll talk to her. Not with anger, but with clarity. She needs to hear this from me face to face." Daniel looked worried. "Are you sure? She's not the easiest person to reason with." "That doesn't matter," Maria said calmly. "I'm not looking for an argument. I want her to understand the weight of her choices." Outside, a few neighbors still lingered on porches, talking in hushed tones. Karen's house stood across the street, her lights glowing faintly through the windows. Curtains shifted slightly, suggesting she was pacing inside. Perhaps she was nervous, perhaps embarrassed, but Maria knew she would not leave things as they were. Maria adjusted her jacket, ensuring her badge was tucked away now, no longer on display. She wanted this conversation to be woman to woman, not detective to civilian. Daniel watched her, unsure if he should follow. "I'll be fine," Maria reassured him, noticing the concern in his eyes. "I've spoken to harder people than Karen." He gave a small nod. "I'll wait here." With steady steps, Maria opened the front door and crossed the street. Each step echoed with purpose, her presence calm but commanding. A few neighbors noticed her and grew quiet, their eyes following her. They knew where she was headed, and curiosity filled the air again. Maria reached Karen's porch and knocked gently on the door. For a moment, there was no answer. Then the curtain shifted and Karen's face appeared briefly before disappearing again. Seconds later, the door opened slightly, revealing Karen with arms folded tightly across her chest. "Maria," Karen said stiffly, her voice low but edged with defensiveness. "Karen," Maria replied, her tone calm and respectful. "May I come in for a moment?" Karen hesitated, her eyes darting across the street where neighbors pretended not to stare. Reluctantly, she stepped aside and allowed Maria inside. The house smelled faintly of lavender, and the furniture was arranged neatly, almost too neatly, as though Karen had fussed over every detail. The air inside felt tense, as if even the walls sensed the weight of what had just happened. Maria stood in the living room, her eyes steady on Karen. "I'm not here to fight," she began gently. "I just want to talk." Karen pressed her lips together, her posture stiff. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood." "I understand," Maria said with patience. "But Karen, you didn't ask questions. You didn't speak to me. You went straight to the police, and your assumption could have caused harm." Karen looked away, her hands tightening on her arms. "I saw a gun, Maria. What was I supposed to think? This is a quiet neighborhood. We don't need weapons here." Maria's expression softened, but her voice remained steady. "You saw a gun, yes, but you didn't see the badge next to it. You didn't ask yourself why I might carry one. Karen, I'm a detective. I carry a weapon because it's part of my duty, not because I want to scare anyone. Karen's eyes flickered with discomfort. But what if you weren't? What if you were just someone dangerous walking around with a weapon? That's exactly why assumptions are dangerous, Maria explained. You didn't know, but you acted as though you did. Karen, do you realize how quickly things could have escalated? Officers arrived ready for a potential threat. A wrong move, a misunderstanding, and someone could have been hurt. Not just me. Even the officers could have been placed at risk. Karen's lips trembled slightly. She lowered her arms, her voice softening. I didn't think of it that way. I only wanted to be careful. There's nothing wrong with being careful, Maria said kindly, but caution should come with thought. Ask. Observe. Make sure you understand before you act. You called on your neighbor, someone who has lived here for years without even speaking a word to me first. Karen's face grew red, not just from embarrassment, but from a heavy mix of emotions. She sank onto the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly together. I was scared, she admitted quietly. I don't like guns. They make me nervous. Maria sat across from her, keeping her voice gentle. I understand fear. I've seen it in many people. But fear should not control your actions. When fear makes you act without clarity, it leads to mistakes. Mistakes that can harm innocent people. Karen swallowed hard, her eyes brimming with conflict. So you're saying I should have trusted you? I'm saying you should have trusted yourself to ask, Maria replied. If you saw something you didn't understand, you could have spoken to me. You could have asked if everything was all right. Even a simple conversation would have changed this outcome. Instead, you turned me into a suspect in my own neighborhood. The room grew quiet. The ticking of a clock on the wall was the only sound. Karen sat with her eyes lowered, while Maria's calm presence filled the space. After a long pause, Karen finally spoke again. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I didn't know you were a detective. Maria leaned forward slightly, her eyes warm but firm. Respect shouldn't depend on titles, Karen. Even if I weren't a detective, even if I were just Maria from across the street, I still deserved a fair chance before judgment. Everyone does. Karen looked up, her expression shifting. For the first time, her eyes softened as though the weight of Maria's words was settling deep within her. She gave a slow nod. You're right. I was wrong. Maria stood, giving her a small nod. I appreciate you listening. That's all I wanted. Karen rose too, though her posture was less stiff now. Her voice was quieter, almost humbled. Thank you for coming to talk instead of just staying angry. I'll try to do better, Maria offered a faint smile. That's all anyone can do. Try to be better. She turned toward the door, her steps measured. Karen followed, watching silently as Maria stepped back onto the porch. Across the street, neighbors still lingered, pretending to check mailboxes or water plants. But their eyes followed Maria as she walked home. Daniel opened the door before she could knock. Relief crossed his face. How did it go? Maria exhaled slowly, slipping off her jacket. She listened. That's a start. He nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. That's more than I expected. The night settled over the neighborhood, stars beginning to prick the darkening sky. The earlier tension began to fade, but the lesson remained in the air like a quiet reminder. One call had brought suspicion, but one conversation had begun to plant understanding. Maria sat at the table with Daniel, her thoughts still heavy but her heart lighter. She knew the road ahead with Karen might not be easy, but at least the first step had been taken. And outside, the neighbors who had watched everything now carried a new story to share, not of danger or scandal, but of a detective who met suspicion with patience and who turned confrontation into clarity. The neighborhood rested under the quiet blanket of evening. Street lamps flickered on, casting warm circles of light across the pavement. The air was calm, yet inside many homes the memory of flashing patrol cars and sharp questions still lingered. People carried the story on their lips, whispering about what had happened earlier. Some spoke with admiration for Maria, others with disbelief at Karen's hasty call, but one truth was clear. Everyone had witnessed a moment that would stay in their minds for a long time. Maria sat at her dining table with Daniel. A plate of food rested before her, though she hardly touched it. She stirred the vegetables slowly, her eyes distant. Daniel leaned on his elbow, watching her with quiet concern. You haven't eaten a bite, he said softly. Maria gave a small smile that did not reach her eyes. I know, I'm just thinking. About Karen? About everything, Maria replied. She set her fork down and folded her hands. It's strange, Daniel. At work, I face situations 10 times harder. Yet tonight, standing in my own driveway, it felt heavier. Maybe because it was home. Maybe because it was personal. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You carried yourself with grace. Even the officers could see that. Maria nodded slowly. They respected me because of the badge. But I keep thinking, what if I hadn't been wearing it so clearly? What if they hadn't seen it right away? A misunderstanding could have led to something none of us wanted. Daniel's grip tightened, but it didn't. They saw, they understood, and they saluted you. His words lingered, reminding Maria of that exact moment. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling the sudden shift in the officers' posture when they realized who she was. Their suspicion melted into recognition, and in place of sharp eyes came respectful gazes. That salute had not only been for her badge but also for her years of service, for every long shift and every risk she had taken to protect the city. Still, Maria knew the salute had carried another meaning in the eyes of the neighbors. It was a sign that the woman Karen had accused was not dangerous but honorable. For many who had doubted, it had rewritten the story in a single gesture. After dinner, Maria stepped out onto the porch for fresh air. The night was cool and stars sprinkled the sky above. Across the street, lights glowed faintly in Karen's windows. Curtains swayed, and Maria sensed Karen was restless inside. Other houses looked calm, though she noticed figures peeking occasionally through blinds, curious whether Maria would appear again. Daniel joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed her one, and they stood side by side, sipping quietly. The warmth of the cup seeped into Maria's hands, calming her. You know, Daniel said, those officers will talk about this too. Word spreads in their circles. They'll say they responded to a call, and it turned out to be Detective Lopez. They'll remember how you handled it. Maria gave a small chuckle. I hope they remember it as a lesson in caution, not just as a story to laugh about. Daniel smiled. With the way they saluted, I don't think they'll forget. As they spoke, footsteps approached from down the street. It was one of their neighbors, Mrs. Green, an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle walk. She carried a shawl around her shoulders and moved with the slow grace of someone who had lived long enough to see many stories unfold. Good evening, she called softly as she reached the porch. Maria and Daniel greeted her warmly, inviting her to sit for a moment. She accepted, lowering herself onto the porch chair with care. I won't stay long, Mrs. Green began, her voice low and sincere. I just wanted to tell you both that I'm glad you live here. Tonight reminded me of how quickly fear can twist things. But you showed calm, Maria. You showed who you are without anger. That matters more than you know. Maria's heart warmed at the words. Thank you, Mrs. Green, that means a lot. The older woman nodded. Don't let Karen's actions trouble you too deeply. People like her see the world through worry. Sometimes it blinds them. But others saw clearly tonight. They saw the salute. They saw the truth. After a few more kind words, Mrs. Green returned home, leaving Maria and Daniel in thoughtful silence. The next morning, sunlight poured across the street, washing away the heaviness of the night. Yet the memory of the previous evening was still fresh. Maria prepared herself for the day, her routine steady as always. She pinned her badge to her belt, holstered her weapon, and packed her bag. Daniel, sipping coffee at the table, asked, Are you heading to the station? Yes, Maria replied. I want to clear my head with work. As she stepped outside, she noticed Karen standing near her mailbox. Karen's posture was uneasy, her hands fidgeting as if she were waiting for Maria. Their eyes met briefly, and Karen quickly looked away. Maria gave a polite nod, not forcing conversation, and continued to her car. She could sense Karen's shame, but she also sensed a small desire for change. At the station later that day, Maria's colleagues greeted her with respect as always. A few had already heard about the call. Lopez heard you had some excitement at home, one officer remarked lightly. Maria smiled faintly. Excitement isn't the word I'd use, more like misunderstanding. Her captain, a steady man with years of service behind him, stepped in. I heard how you handled it. You showed patience where many would have lost their temper. That's the mark of a true professional. Maria appreciated the words, though she did not let them inflate her pride. She knew she had simply done what was right. When she returned home that evening, the street was quiet again. Children played with chalk on the sidewalk, and neighbors watered their gardens. Life moved on, yet whispers still followed the memory of that salute. Karen appeared once more on her porch. This time she did not cross her arms or wear the air of judgment. Instead, she gave Maria a small, hesitant wave. It was not much, but it was something, a sign that perhaps understanding had begun to grow where suspicion once lived. Maria lifted her hand in return, offering a calm smile before stepping inside her home. Daniel welcomed her back, and together they sat to enjoy the evening meal. The events of the night before had settled into the rhythm of the neighborhood. But for Maria, the memory of the officer's salute remained a reminder of more than just respect. It was a symbol of the fine line between suspicion and truth, fear and understanding. And though Karen had not spoken a full apology yet, Maria believed the message had been received. Sometimes words were not needed when a gesture carried the weight of truth. That salute, brief but powerful, had spoken to everyone who witnessed it. It told them that Maria was not a threat but a protector. It told them that judgment without thought could unravel in seconds. And it told them that respect, once earned, shines brighter than suspicion ever could. The neighborhood would remember it, and so would Maria. The sun rose slowly over the neighborhood, casting golden light across the houses and filling the quiet streets with warmth. Birds sang softly on tree branches, and children began to stir inside their homes, preparing for another day. It looked like an ordinary morning, but inside Maria's heart it felt different. The heavy shadows of suspicion that had once followed her steps seemed lighter now. The salute from the officers and the quiet shift in the eyes of her neighbors had changed something important. Maria stood at her kitchen window, sipping tea and watching the street outside. She could see Mr. Patel watering his small garden, humming a tune as he worked. Across the street, two boys raced their bicycles, their laughter echoing. Life looked peaceful again. Daniel walked in carrying a plate of toast and set it on the table. "Big day today," he said with a smile. Maria raised an eyebrow. "Why big?" "You'll see," Daniel replied, hiding a secret grin. Maria shook her head, amused by his mystery, but she let it go. She knew Daniel well enough to sense that he had something planned, but she also trusted him enough not to press for answers. She finished her tea, picked up her badge, and got ready for the station. When she stepped outside, Karen was standing by her mailbox again. This time Karen didn't look away. She stood tall, though her face showed nervousness. "Good morning," Karen said quietly. Maria paused, surprised by the words. She offered a calm smile. "Good morning." There was a long silence between them, filled with unspoken tension. Finally, Karen sighed and spoke again. "I want to say I'm sorry," she said. Her voice trembled but carried honesty. "That night I let my fear get the better of me. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but instead I was accusing someone who didn't deserve it. I didn't see you for who you are. I only saw what I imagined. That was wrong." Maria listened carefully. She could see the effort it took for Karen to speak those words. Apologies were never easy, especially when pride stood in the way. "Thank you for saying that," Maria said gently. "It takes strength to admit when we're wrong. I hope we can move forward from here." Karen nodded, relief in her eyes. "I'd like that. Maybe someday, if you're willing, we could have coffee. I'd like to know the real you, not the version I created in my mind." Maria agreed softly. "I'd like that too." It was a small step, but it carried the weight of healing. Maria walked to her car, knowing the neighborhood was beginning to change not just in whispers but in actions. At the station, Maria settled into her work. Reports, meetings, and calls filled her morning, but her mind drifted off into the neighborhood. She wondered how many others had been touched by the lesson of that night. She hoped the salute had taught them that respect must be stronger than suspicion, and understanding must be stronger than fear. Later that week, Daniel's secret became clear. The neighborhood committee was holding a community gathering at the park. Tables were set up with food and drinks. Children's games were arranged, and chairs were placed in neat rows near the stage. The event was meant to bring people together, to ease the tension that had hung in the air, and to remind everyone that unity was stronger than division. Maria didn't know until that evening that Daniel had suggested her name as the guest speaker. When she saw the program, she looked at him with wide eyes. "Daniel, you should have told me," she whispered. He smiled warmly. "If I had told you, you might have worried too much. But you're the right person to speak. You don't need a speech written on paper. You'll speak from your heart, and that's enough." As the gathering began, people from all around the neighborhood arrived. Families carried picnic baskets, children played tag, and neighbors greeted one another. Even Karen came, standing quietly at the edge with a small plate of food in her hands. Maria noticed her presence but did not call attention to it. When it was time, the committee chair welcomed everyone and introduced Maria. Applause filled the park as she walked onto the stage. She took a deep breath and looked at the crowd. Their faces reflected many things: curiosity, respect, and even hope. "Good evening," Maria began, her voice steady but warm. "Thank you for being here. I know the past week has been unusual for us. There was a night that shook our peace, a night that made us question one another. But tonight we gather to remind ourselves of something greater." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "I have served as an officer for many years. I've walked into danger, and I've walked into fear. I've seen how suspicion can turn friends into strangers, and how fear can cloud the truth. But I have also seen how respect can heal, and how understanding can change everything. That night in our neighborhood, fear tried to take over, but respect brought it back. The salute I received wasn't just for me. It was a reminder to all of us that we must see each other clearly, not through shadows of doubt, but through light of truth." The crowd listened in silence, their eyes fixed on her. "We live side by side," Maria continued. "Our children play together. Our gardens grow next to one another. We share these streets, these mornings, these nights. If we let fear divide us, we lose what makes us strong. But if we choose respect, patience, and kindness, we build a community that stands firm against any storm." Applause rose from the crowd. Some people even stood, clapping with sincerity. Maria glanced across the gathering and saw Karen clapping too, her eyes glistening with emotion. After the speech, many neighbors came to greet Maria. They shook her hand, thanked her for her words, and spoke about how the night of the salute had changed their perspective. Even those who had once whispered doubt now spoke with gratitude. Karen approached last. She held a cup of tea and extended it toward Maria. "For you," Karen said softly. "I thought maybe this could be the beginning of the coffee I promised." Maria accepted it with a smile. "It's a good beginning." From that night forward, the neighborhood grew closer. Maria noticed small changes every day. People waved more often, stopped to chat longer, and looked at one another with gentler eyes. The children played without the tension of watchful suspicion, and the adults shared laughter more freely. Karen, slowly but surely, became part of that warmth. She invited Maria and Daniel over for tea one afternoon. They sat in her living room, surrounded by photographs of her family, and listened as she spoke honestly about her fears. She admitted that her actions came not from hatred but from years of worrying too much about what could go wrong. Maria listened without judgment, offering reassurance and patience. As weeks turned into months, Maria realized the salute had done more than protect her reputation. It had planted a seed of change in the entire community. That single gesture had reminded everyone that respect was not optional but essential. It had taught Karen humility, given Maria peace, and given the neighborhood unity. One late evening, Maria and Daniel sat on their porch again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The street was alive with children's laughter, dogs barking playfully, and neighbors sharing stories. Daniel looked at Maria and smiled. "It feels different now, doesn't it?" Maria nodded. "It feels lighter. It feels like home." She leaned back in her chair, letting the calm wash over her. She thought about the journey from suspicion to respect, from fear to trust, and she felt grateful. She knew challenges would come again, as they always did, but she also knew the neighborhood had learned a lesson that would last. And as the sky darkened, stars began to appear and lights flickered on in every home. Maria felt a deep sense of belonging, not just as an officer, not just as someone respected for her badge, but as a neighbor, a friend, and a part of something larger than herself. The salute had started it, but the people, through their choice to grow, had carried it forward, and that was the true new beginning.